Okay, before we start, I'm going to ask from all of you to please turn off your cell phones right now. There we go. Thank you. So good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us tonight here at the Miami Beach JCC for our annual International Women's Day event with our special guest, Qian Julie Wang and Cantor Siegel. My name is Mitil Simancas, and I am the co-chair for the Arts and Culture Committee here at the Miami Beach JCC. First, I want to thank all of our co-sponsors who helped make this evening possible: the Miami Beach Chamber of Commerce, the National Council of Jewish Women, Temple Bet Shalom, and the Betsy Hotel for hosting Qian Julie. We appreciate all your support, and it goes without saying that I am extremely grateful to all our professionals right here at the JCC for helping us put this event together. So thank you. International Women's Day is a day that recognizes women's achievements. It also asks us to not only imagine a gender-equal world, a world free of bias, stereotypes, and discrimination, but to help work together towards making this become a reality. Our special guest tonight is someone who works towards that goal in her professional life, through her volunteering work at the Manhattan Central Synagogue, as well as in her writings. Qian Julie Wang came to the United States with her parents as a 7-year-old undocumented immigrant from China. For 5 years thereafter, the three lived in the shadows of undocumented life in New York City. Qian Julie is a graduate of Yale Law School and Swarthmore College, where she juggled classes and extracurriculars with 4 part-time jobs. Qian Julie is now a litigator. She wrote Beautiful Country as a memoir of her first few years in the United States on her iPhone during her subway commute to and from work at a national law firm, where she was elected to partnership within 2 years of joining the firm. She is now managing partner at Gottlieb & Wang LLP, a firm dedicated to advocating for education and civil rights. She regularly speaks on issues such as immigration, education, discrimination, and the power of literacy in the media, and at conferences, universities, corporations, houses of worships, and community centers as cool as this one. She is the founder of Central Synagogue's Use of Color group and a member of its Racial Justice Task Force and its Social Justice Leadership. Qian Julie lives in Brooklyn with her husband and their 2 rescue dogs, Salty and Peppers, which we hope you will bring next time you come to Miami. So, before I move towards Cantor Siegel, so much of your life and what you do resonates deeply in me. I'm also an immigrant to this country. You cannot tell by my accent, I know, but hard to believe. I also had a long journey until I was able to become a US citizen. As a Jewish Mexican woman, I also have been subjected to prejudice, racism, and anti-Semitism, not necessarily in that order. I was extremely moved with your story and your journey, and it only reinforces my belief that we are a product of our circumstances. However, we have the ability and the power to decide what do we do with that. You have brought healing, as you have expressed many times, to your family, to yourself, and those around you. And you are a fierce advocate for the ones who don't have a voice. I love that the first word you see in your website, in your law firm website, is compassion. That is a value that we should all live by and guide our everyday lives with it. So leading the discussion this evening with our special guest is Cantor Lisa Siegel from Temple Bet Shalom, where she has been a member of the clergy since 2011. She oversees all musical and liturgical aspects of the synagogue and is also the director of the B'nai Mitzvah program. Cantor Siegel is a certified Prepare and Reach premarital counselor and is qualified to officiate at life cycle events as a solo officiant or alongside her rabbinic colleagues. Cantor Siegel plays guitar and percussion and is a mezzo-soprano. She is a member of the Garage Band, a classic oldies rock and roll band, and the Rock on Shabbat Band, a group of individuals from various Miami synagogues that lead services in the community. Cantor Siegel is married to Jim and has 2 adult children, Danny and Andrea. All 4 are active alumni of the University of Florida and proud members of the Gator Nation. Cantor Siegel, let me confide in you. I also have 3 Gators at home. One of them, his name is also Danny. So we have a lot in common. So we all share the Gator pride. On International Women's Day and every single day, we believe women's storytelling is an act of courage and a way to make the world a more equal and just place. And I don't want to start tonight's program without just stopping for a second and thinking about all those women, mothers, daughters, wives, with their children, becoming refugees overnight, running away with a backpack or a carry-on, or maybe just their children in their arms, and to think about all the millions of women that are refugees from different countries, call it Afghanistan, Venezuela, Rwanda, or whatever you want to call it. So let's just keep them in mind tonight. And ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Qian Julie Wang and Cantor Lisa Siegel. Thank you both for being with us tonight. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for having us, and thank all of you for turning out for this, what is going to be an amazing evening with Qian Julie Wang. On Rosh Hashanah afternoon, I started to listen, as I often listen to Central Synagogue recordings, to the Rosh Hashanah afternoon service, which included, Qian Julie, your own interpretation of the Haftarah, which many of you know is the story of Hannah, and your journey back into childhood, growing up very hungry, your love of books, and your undocumented years, weaving it with your own discovery of prayer, which began in your sanctuary, your small little bathroom, in the midst of your childhood despair. You shared all of this on the first day. That was the day that your book was actually published. And you also shared your own painful experiences in the Jewish community. So 2 weeks ago, I just went to a friend's of mine to just pay a visit, and her husband happens to be an author, a local author, and she also works part-time for Books and Books, and she's my book guru. And it just so happened that she was very quick to recommend Beautiful Country to me just a few weeks ago. So I purchased the Audible version, which I do often because I like to walk and listen to books. And I have really enjoyed hearing your story with your own voice on my daily walks. So fast forward 2 weeks, and the JCC reaches out to Temple Beth Shalom, deciding that they want one of their clergy to do the interview. And none of the rabbis could do it, and so they turned to me, and I said, not only I was planning to go anyway because I wanted to hear this author, but I'm so honored to be asked. This was Bashert that I'm here, and I'm so grateful that this came my way. So we're really grateful to have this opportunity to discuss further the issues that you raised in your book, and also touch upon your journey to Judaism, and in your own words, from pain to purpose to promise. So, as I said, I didn't have a lot of lead time. I'm still currently listening to your memoir, and I'm amazed at your story of your early years in America and your resilience. I understand you wrote this book on the subways, commuting to work as a corporate lawyer. And so my first question is, what was the impetus, the reason that you wanted to put this story to print?
My My first book event when the book came out was with Charles Yu, who wrote Interior China. Closer? Okay. I was saying my very first book event after my book came out in September was with Charles Yu, who wrote Interior Chinatown. And better? And I'm used to small spaces and whispering. And he also started writing when he was in Big Law, as we call it in New York City. And we both agreed that any lawyer who also chooses to write is not sound of mind. And my answer to that question is that I felt almost bewitched, possessed to write this. So in 2016, I finally became a naturalized citizen, 22 years journey since I landed at JFK. And it was May 2016, and it was difficult to the bitter end. I left my law office, which wasn't that far from the courthouse where I was sworn in, and it was sunny. I start walking, and I'm down the block, and it starts pouring rain. And so I show up at the courthouse like a drowned rat, and I'm like, this is how difficult you're going to make it for me? Fine. And I didn't invite anybody because, not even my parents, because I thought, I had been a lawyer for many years, 4 years by then. I had a green card, so I thought, there's no difference. It doesn't make a difference. I'm allowed to be here now. I'm documented. That's all that matters. But as I'm sitting there in that room with so many happy immigrants who are dressed so nicely and families and crying, and then a video screen comes down and there's a video of President Obama looking across the room and saying, "Greetings, fellow American." And up until that point, I was like stone. I mean, I was dripping, but I wasn't crying. And when I heard fellow American, I just started ugly sobbing. Everything that had been bottled in me for 22 years somehow got unlocked by those words. And I just had never allowed myself to recognize or process how badly I had needed to be recognized as American, how much I loved this country and how it insisted on rejecting me over and over again. And as I exited the courtroom and stood at the threshold, I told myself, never forget this day and never, ever take this for granted. And there are still days like today. I wake up and I'm like, I'm an American. This is my home. This is finally my home. But as the nation reeled into the election and the political discourse changed that year in 2016, my communities, both undocumented and Chinese, were beginning to be attacked and continue to be attacked. I felt that I now had a profound privilege, and my story of being undocumented was no longer mine to keep a secret, which I had kept it a secret for all of those years. I was deeply ashamed of it. And I realized it was no longer mine to keep because there were so many people out there who did not have the privilege of being in that room and being called a fellow American by the President of the United States. So that was when I said, I'm going to share this story if it kills me. And I sat down in front of my laptop after, I think it was like 2 a.m. after working a full day. I came home and I'm like, I'm going to write this book with a capital B. I'm going to sit down and write this book. And I put my fingers to the keyboard and I'm like, I don't know how to write this book. I have no idea how to write this book because I have not ever talked about these memories. How do you even begin to share them? So I went into therapy, and I was in therapy for, well, I'm still in therapy, but that never ends. If you're a Jew, you know that never ends. But
Most of us are.
It took me about a year and a half to unearth a lot of memories, a lot of pain, a lot of laughter and joy, and open up my heart and really bring that little girl to life. And even when I felt ready, though, I sat down at, again, 2 a.m. after work, and I'm just like, I'm so tired. I can't do this. And I had this whole back and forth of, I have to write this book, and I have no time to write this book. And one day I was sitting in a stalled subway train in a tunnel where the conductor said we're being held we'll be leaving momentarily, which if you've ever been in New York means it can be anywhere from 2 minutes to an hour. And I said, I have so much to do, including this book, and I'm stuck on this train. I can't do anything. And I looked down at my hand, and my phone was right there, and I didn't have cell reception, so I couldn't do any legal work. I couldn't call my clients. And I just started writing. And something about texting almost, thumbing it on the phone, felt more casual and felt like there was less pressure. I wasn't writing a capital B book. I was just writing notes in the Notes app. And somehow through that medium, I was able to bring a lot of the intimate memories back into life.
Beautiful. Can you talk about the significance of the title, Beautiful Country?
Beautiful Country was not the original title for my manuscript, actually. The original title that I had, the working draft, was Girl in the Shadows. And back then there were a lot of girl in the title books. And as we went out on submission, my agent just said, let's make it a cleaner title. So we both went back and made a list of possible titles, and this was on both of our lists, and that's when we knew. Beautiful Country is a literal translation of the Chinese word for America, which is Meiguo. And we both thought it was so perfect because it represents this dichotomy of what America puts itself out as and is seen as on the international stage as a beacon of justice and light and freedom, but also the very harsh realities that often get buried by that portrayal.
Okay. So you obviously chose to write this book based solely upon your experiences from ages 7 to 12. And what was it about those years that were so important?
Those were the years when I learned to hide who I am, when I learned shame and that there was something inherently wrong with me. And those were the years that my parents and I never talked about for the decades to come. But even more than that, I think the ages of 7 to 12 are so formative and seminal. So much of who we are as teenagers, as adults, come from those years where we're going out in the world so open and vulnerable, and we're learning instance by instance to put on armor and hide and keep people at a distance. And I think that if we could all go back, as I've had the privilege of doing, to those years of our lives, we could probably heal a lot of deep-seated wounds and fears that we still carry to this day.
Beautiful, thank you. Miami is largely, we talked about it a little bit before, an immigrant town, mostly from Central and South America. But one of the shared experiences of children who immigrate to the U.S. is learning English. And I loved the journey. I'm loving listening to the journey of you as you learn English. And I'd like you just to talk about that journey of learning the language.
It was conveyed to me very early on that learning to speak English perfectly would be my ultimate protection and armor. Because so long as I could convince someone that I spoke like a native speaker, then there would not be doubt about my immigration status. I could plausibly claim that I've been born here, which is something that my father, in his fear of deportation, told me early on. Just pretend that you were born here. And of course, when he told me this my first day in New York City, I was like, well, I don't speak any English. I don't think that's going to be plausible. So I threw myself into books. And before we left China, my father always told me that books were magic. Books held the key to life and dreams and hopes. And it made sense given his dissident background. His family was persecuted for his older brother's writings, and he grew up reading banned books that were hidden under the floorboards of their home. And I heard it a lot, and he was an English literature professor, so obviously I was surrounded by books, but I never really understood what he meant until I stepped into that public library in Chinatown. And I remember feeling so incredibly lonely when I went in there because all of my friends and family were gone and on the opposite side of the world, and I didn't know when, if ever, I would see them again. But I walked into the stacks and shelves, and I saw so many new friends, animals, people, families, communities. And even though I was motivated to go in there and spend time in there for a very practical reason, survival, it became a source of nurture for me, a source of comfort and enrichment. And once that happened, as you all might know if you're readers growing up or you have children who read, once you fall in love as a child, those books, those characters, Anne Frank and Charlotte and Wilbur and Jonas from The Giver, they're forever a part of me. And so with that, I didn't feel so lonely. And I remember even having a book that I had read, if I carried it with me to a place that was scary, I felt less scared. And to this day, I still carry books with me everywhere, just because I always know I have a friend, no matter where I am.
Our tradition says that names are windows into our souls. Hashem, the name, and that there is divinity in a name. And many biblical characters, as we know, have name changes during seminal or transitional moments in their lives. We have Avram to Avraham, Sarai to Sarah, Jacob to Israel, one who wrestles with God, which I know you can relate to. And you were born Qian, and in grade school you changed your name to Julie. And when you joined the Jewish people, you took on the Hebrew name of Hadassah, very timely, I must say. And now you go by Qian Julie, lots of name changes. Yeah. Can you tell us about what those names signify and what they mean?
They each represent such an integral but different part of myself, and I think it's such an honor to have different names to represent the full range and multitude of who anyone is. So Qian, for me, first and foremost, is that scared little girl who had to lie and learn to lie and got by on sneakiness and charm and lies and did whatever she could to survive. And there are still days now when I have to remind myself I don't need to be in survival mode or fight or flight anymore. But Qian, with all of her protections, kept me safe for so long, and she is very much a part of me. I think Qian also is interesting because it's traditionally in Chinese, it's the name of a famous emperor. It's traditionally a very masculine name. And I suspected this growing up because my father named me after his favorite poet, who was a man. And then there was a famous emperor with my name who was a man. And I turned to my mom one day and I was like, was I supposed to be a boy? What happened? And she's like, no, it's a great name. Just don't ask any questions. And later on in college, I Googled the character. And sure enough, in Wikipedia, it was an explanation. Qian is part of the trigrams. One of the central forces is the masculine force. It represents the sky, whereas Kun is the feminine force that represents the earth. And father figure, it was like, it was a whole spreadsheet showing me all the ways in which Qian meant man. And so I think it's interesting because Qian also now signals to me the ways in which I never quite was able to fit into what being an obedient, submissive woman, that so many of us are taught to be. I was never able to fit into that, and so I think it's really fitting that my parents gave me that name. Julie, I chose because I so badly wanted to fit in. There was a puppet on The Puzzle Place, which a 90s show that does not get nearly enough love. It's amazing. It's this house is called The Puzzle Place, and all these puppets of different races who are friends come and they hang out. And there was a Chinese puppet named Julie Wu. And she was able to share things about her culture, and one time she even wore a traditional Chinese dress, but she also fit in equal parts. And I so wanted to be her, and I so wanted to go hang out at the Puzzle Place with all of her friends. So I took that name and was afraid to wear it for a while because I was like, well, people are gonna know I'm not Julie. I don't fit in. I'm Qian. And it took me a while to be able to wear that name confidently. And that was a name that I used as I, stepped into the courtroom for the first time and found my voice and my footing as a litigator and as an adult and a woman. So it is so very much part of me, even though it was one that I kind of adopted on my own. And finally, Hadassah, which is quite fitting. I remember reading that Hadassah was the other name for Esther, and there's a meaning of being hidden, and all that Hadassah represents in terms of Judaism and women's rights and being a strong woman and paving the path. And I'm not saying that I am that, but it was everything that I aspired to be and everything I aspired to own in myself, and it just felt right. So if I could, I would go by Qian Julie Hadassah every day, but it's a bit long.
Well, yes, it's certainly, you're certainly heroic and brave like Hadassah. Your character in the book is not Jewish, at that time. Can you tell us about your journey to Judaism and how, after an initial reaction that no, you weren't going to become Jewish, you actually changed your mind?
My first encounter with Judaism was actually in the 3rd grade, and I really regret not putting it in the book, but I'll put it in some other piece of writing. My teacher, Miss Pong, who I call Miss Pong, it's not her actual name, my favorite teacher of all time, who I recently reconnected with, she assigned The Diary of Anne Frank. And I believe it was a simplified version. And I remember reading it and thinking, of all the books that were assigned in school, this is a girl that makes me feel seen. And I didn't understand why, because I had never been through the Holocaust. I wasn't subject to a genocide. But Anne Frank was a girl who grew up in hiding because her identity made her illegal. And of course, looking back, I would connect with her. And even as she grew up under really terrifying and horrific circumstances, she was able to revel in growing up, in playing with her cat, in developing a crush on a boy, in these totems of normalcy that I myself was also fixated on and wanted very much. And so I thought, as I looked around in the class, and my classmates loved Anne, and I loved Anne, and my teacher loved Anne, if Anne could be loved and admired, then maybe there was something redeeming in me. And from there was something about Holocaust literature that just drew me. I mean, reading Maus, some of the ways in which the father engages with the son on a day-to-day, the present day, might as well be my father and me. Like, there was just so many parallels of generational trauma, survivorship between the Cultural Revolution in China, where many millions died, and the Holocaust. And it just grabbed my heart. And I read Night, and I read Man in Search of Meaning. Actually, when I went into therapy, my therapist gave me the book, and I was like, I read this already. Why are you giving this to me? And he's like, this will help you understand. I'm like, I read it. And Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was such a leader and such an inspiration for me in my going into law, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, all these Jewish figures. But I just never put it together. I mean, growing up in New York, I was just like, oh, these are just, New York people and people that I connect with. And so, of course, when I met Mark, and he very nervously and tentatively said, would you ever consider converting? I was like, no, I'm Qian. I don't bow down to a man. I don't take your name, and I don't take your religion, and I am a feminist, and that's the end of the story. But then he said, would you consider getting to know the culture, because I would love to raise my children in a Jewish community. And that made so much sense to me, because I had always been a spiritual person. I would pray in the bathroom and do these weird things that I didn't understand, but I had no religious framework. And I had been a community-minded person who didn't have a community. And I very much wanted my children to have that. So we went and took some classes on Judaism. And again, the rabbi's handing out readings. I'm like, I read this already. Why are you giving this to me? And they're talking about this. I'm like, I understand that. I read it years ago. And still, I went into my first meeting with the rabbi, and I said, I just want you to know I'm not converting, so don't you even try. And she's like, okay, good. And I was like, I have a lot of questions about what we talk about in class. She's like, great, what are your questions? And then I'm asking all these questions, like, this rabbi talked about this and examined that. I'm like, oh no. And she's like, yeah, this makes you more Jewish that you would ask this. I was like, oh no, I'm completely playing into her hand. It took just all of the wind out of my sails as a dissident person who just needs to resist whatever's being put in front of her. And throughout the course of that conversation, it clicked, because I was talking about everything I had read and understood. And I thought, oh shoot, I'm actually Jewish. And so it from there, it felt like Beshert. And there were so many just beautiful, magical moments in my path to finding, I guess, or discovering the Judaism that was in me. So I know we don't have hours, but I'll give one quick story. My very first Yom Kippur, I was terrified of fasting. I'd watched Mark do it a few times. I watched other people do it, and I'm like, how can you do that? Because, of course, as someone who grew up hungry, to choose to not eat was unfathomable. Whenever I was on campus in college or law school, wherever there was free food, I would eat it, even if I wasn't hungry. I was just like, that you can't waste that, and I might be hungry later, so I'm just going to eat it now. And so to actually choose to go a full day without eating was the most terrifying thing to me. And as I was navigating my way into Jewish communities, I was like, this is the last thing I have. I just feel called to do it, and it just scares me so much. But I finally did it, and I was so very nervous. And at that time, we were not part of a shul, so we signed up for these makeshift services all around Brooklyn that were just held at places that were not synagogues. And we were assigned to attend services in an elementary school. And it wasn't until the morning when I was most hungry, right before lunchtime, that I realized the services were actually being held in the school cafeteria. And I turned around and I looked, and I was standing right in front of where the lunch lady would have served the free lunch. And if that is not a sign that makes you believe, I don't know what is. And I looked around, and I'm singing, and I start crying, and I'm thinking, I'm not hungry at all. This is the most empowered and safe I've ever felt.
Beautiful. I'm currently, as I said, listening to your book, and I'm finding it pretty gut-wrenching to listen to, the journey of your parents and going from academic professionals to working in sweatshops, constantly afraid of the authorities, anybody in uniform, run away from, etc. I'm just wondering can you talk a little bit about how their experiences impacted you?
A lot of immigrant children go through this. A lot of children with parents with sicknesses and substance abuse problems and other issues go through this. But for me to see the fear in my parents so palpable on their faces and in their bodies, in New York they just started shrinking themselves, and as a child, you soak up all of the emotional energy of your parent, but it was visible. And I saw them as human, which children don't really do. They don't see their parents as human, not at that age. They see their parents as godlike and in control. And I realized that up until then, as long as my parents were around, and my mother in particular, I didn't worry at all. Like, she had it. She had everything under control, and I didn't need to worry about a thing. And in New York, that just got pulled out from under my feet. I had nothing to stand on because my mother was afraid. And if my mother was afraid, then what hope was there for me? And I learned that there were things that I could do to protect them, which is a very new dynamic for us. And anyone who's been through that knows that once that dynamic shifts and flips, it can't go back. The child becomes a protector, and the parent, whether it's because you're translating for your parent and helping them navigate this new culture and society, or whether you're withholding information, as I did, like that I was getting free breakfast at school. And I think in many ways, though, it served me. Psychologists may not say that it's the most healthy experience for a child, but it served me because no matter what happened, and no matter how lost and scared my mother was, she never let me forget that I would be able to get out and I would be able to find a way out. And it gave me a sense, a belief in my own agency in a way that few children, I think, have. And when she started asking me for advice, and I got used to that, I learned to trust my own judgment and my own sense of the world. So in many ways, what happened to us, that all three of us were so woefully underprepared and nobody could really be prepared for it, was the thing that gave me my sense of self, precisely because of how my mother framed it. Because my father tried to make a game and my mother tried to make me laugh and then said, no, you know what to do and you will get out. We may not, but one day you will have everything. And that is why I say at the very end of my book that my parents gave me absolutely everything when they had nothing themselves.
So in talking about your parents, I'm really curious to know what they thought about you publishing this memoir. Is that okay to ask?
Yeah. A very popular question. My mother was the one who gave me the idea to write this book very early on, because I would go in the library and I would see all these characters whom I loved, but there was no one who really looked like us or lived the way that we did. And I turned to her and I said, why are we not being represented? Where are we? I would love to see someone like me in these books. And she said, well, that's why there's you. You'll write a book one day that we'll share with everyone, the little girls out there, that they're not alone. And it was a very wise response, but I think probably one that she forgot, because I became a lawyer and she just completely lost sight of the possibility that I was working on a book. And I kept it secret from my parents because I realized that as soon as I started thinking about them and how it would affect them for these stories to be out there, I just got writer's block, because it's not just my story or my experience, it's also theirs. And I didn't quite have their permission to do it. I think it's probably every parent's worst nightmare for their child to write a detailed book about their childhood. And even more so for my parents, because of what my father went through as a dissident who suffered a lot because his brother wrote something that the government didn't like. And there was still the fear in me that after this book came out, the government would try to deport us, even though we were documented. So I just didn't tell them. And I just kept telling myself in the drafting process, well, this is never going to see, a publisher. This is just for you. You don't know what it takes to write a book. These are just notes for your great-great-grandchildren when you're all dead, and it won't be a problem. And then it got to an editor, an agent, an editor, and publisher, and I thought, oh shoot, I'm gonna have to start deleting deleting these things. And I actually went through with the intent of deleting things to protect my parents, and then I realized I'm gonna have to delete every scene except ones where it was just me. This is gonna be the most boring and short book in the world. So I couldn't do that. So I finally found the courage to tell them 6 months after I already had a deal, already had a publication date. It was 9 months before it came out. And it was because my husband was like, you should tell them before they walk on the street and see your book in a store. Like, that's going to be really bad. So I finally found the courage to tell them, and they do not react well. My mother's first response is, so you want the whole world to know what a bad mother I was. And it broke my heart that after all these years, she had carried the guilt of everything that we've been through on her shoulders, just like I had. And then it turned out just like my father had. My father was like, no, you're not the bad person, I'm the bad person. And because we had never talked about it, we were never able to square our perspectives. So when they finally read the book, and I waited until publication, they came to Rosh Hashanah and then services, and then at lunch I gave it to them. My mother opened the package and sees my name on the cover. The prediction she made had come true, and she just starts crying. My father flips to the very end, which is something I do. I read the very last sentence of a book first. I didn't know it was genetic, but apparently it was. And of course, it's that sentence in my acknowledgments saying that my parents gave me everything when they had nothing. And he was like, I like this book. This is very well written. But then they confessed they didn't know if they could read it because it was just too painful. And they had not thought about those years in so long. But the curiosity got the best of them, and they did read it. And my father called me later that day and said that it felt as if he was watching a movie with himself in it. But he had erased so many scenes, and particularly the scenes where he had done something good, like buying me a Tamagotchi that I longed for so long, or just playing a prank on me to make me laugh. And he said that he felt so very healed by everything that I was able to remember and put in. And my mother was selfless as ever. Said she was just glad that those scenes from the sweatshop and the sushi processing plant were in there because it honored the other women in there and gave voice to their stories. And I'm like, what about you? And she's like, oh, whatever, me. But I want this for the community. And I think that all three of us have come to understand now that this book and the story is not just about the three of us, it's about community.
Beautiful. There's going to be time for you to answer. I'm just going to ask one or two more. What was your impetus? I'm not going to ask that one. Well, you are clearly independent. You're reliant and you're a fighter, yet you had mentors along the way. So whose shoulders do you stand on? Who are you most grateful for?
All of the authors who wrote books that made me feel less alone. When I was growing up and to this day, a lot of my very complicated feelings about being Asian American woman, especially in this time in the aftermath of the Atlanta shooting, came from reading Minor Feelings by Kathy Park Hong. Her work unlocked a lot of my own thoughts and fears and wounds that I buried and was able to put into this book because I read her book as I was editing this one. My Judge Kristen, who I clerked for on the Ninth Circuit, who was the very first person I told about my history and who gave me such safety and security in that very first experience and encouraged me to write this book. She was the first person I texted when I finished because I said, I've finished it. I'm going to delete it all now. And she said, no, don't do that. This is a judicial order. So without someone so very enlightened guiding me and telling me that I could do it, that it was safe. My parents, who I've said, have given me so very much. And the public librarians and school teachers who saw something in me and reflected back to me the talents that I could not see back then and the gifts that I had for the world, and reminded me that what I was facing then was temporary and that I could make it through. And just so many advocates and activists in the Jewish community, in the undocumented community, in the Asian community, who to this day fight when they do not have the privileges that I do, who stand up when it is not necessarily safe to do so. They keep me accountable and they inspire me to keep going.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right, so we're going to give our audience an opportunity to ask some questions as well. We're going to facilitate this, and we encourage you to ask away if you'd like.
Does anybody have any questions? We're going to start at the back and work our way forward.
That's what we call a hot bench. Lots of questions.
Hi. I read your book when it came out. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I read your book when it came out last year, I think, and I loved it. And from what I remember, you ended when you went to Canada. And I know this is probably a very long answer, but maybe you could just summarize how you got back to the United States and, what happened, because it kind of just ended.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
When I got to Canada, all of the things that we struggled with for the preceding 5-6 years went away. Most of the barriers went away. I was able to go to a doctor. I was able to go to school and not have to lie. I was able to go to the dentist, and my mother immediately got a well-paying job as a programmer. So all of the material needs just were met and appeared almost out of nowhere. And it left, I think, all three of us, very confused, because we would say, like, well, we're fine now. So what's the big deal? Why are we still so nervous and scared? Why are our relationships all still so strained? And the psychological and physical remnants of the preceding years took a long time, if ever, to subside. For instance, whenever I had a full meal, I would immediately feel like I had to throw up because my stomach had shrunk and I just could not process that much food. And the emotional stuff was even less tangible. I just felt like I needed to continue to lie. I felt like I needed to continue to struggle. And the struggle that I chose almost immediately was that America had kicked us out. My father wanted to build a life there and raise his family there. It was a beacon for him, truly, based on the works he had read growing up. And we had been kicked out, and I wanted to prove to America that it could not get rid of me that easily. So from very early in my time in Canada, I started working toward coming back here for school on a documented basis for college. And I was single-minded in that focus. I think because there was so much that I just couldn't acknowledge. If I started to look at why I was fighting to go back, or why I was feeling nauseated, or why I felt this need to still protect my mother, who was now at a very good job, paying all the bills, then all of the house of sticks would come apart. And so as long as I had a goal and focus, and during our years in America, that was staying hidden and staying safe. And in Canada, once we were safe, it was going back to America. That was what I focused on, to really almost distract myself. And so I came back as quickly as I could for college, Swarthmore College, and then went on to Yale Law School. And during my college years, my parents came back on work visas. My father ended up going to law school. He's actually now an immigration lawyer for the people of Chinatown. He has his own office. So truly a full circle connection. But yeah, that's kind of the quick answer.
Yes, hi. Thank you. Most interesting, most admirable. When did you start feeling or experience Judaism? Before you met your husband, or when you met him?
I think I was experiencing it from a very early age. In the readings and writings I was drawn to, and even prayer, but I just didn't know what it was. And once I had that framework and had a rabbi telling me, oh, this is the rabbinical thing and this is the theology, it just all snapped into place. So I think I was connected to Judaism far before I could recognize that connection.
Anybody else? We have time for a couple more questions. Whoop. There you go, sir.
I can certainly understand you're wanting to go to law school, but why would you be a litigator?
I love that question. It's actually really apt, because when I met Mark and I told him my story, and he was like, I'm shocked that you would want to stand up in court and have all that attention drawn to you when your whole childhood you were in hiding. And having some dissident generational trauma, like being pushed back on your perspective, like that must be in many ways triggering for you. But and it was terrifying. I think I started at some point, and I don't know when, to orient myself toward everything that scared me, because I had grown up in so much fear. As an adult, I did not want to live in fear at all. And I had jumped through a lot of hoops and proven myself in a lot of realms. And upon graduating law school, I realized the last thing I'm afraid of is public speaking and standing up in court in front of a bunch of distinguished people who have the authority to deport me. That is my biggest fear. So I have to do it. So I went in, and it was terrifying. The first time was truly the worst courtroom experience I think probably any young lawyer has had, where I was defending just a bad position on behalf of the government, and it was in front of 5 judges, because it was New York Appellate Court, and one of the judges, brilliant jurist, stood up. She was so mad because I was just saying all of the wrong things. She started beating on the bench. She said, how could you do this? You are the government. And I'm thinking, you're the government. You're scary. Wait, oh, I am the government. I am the government. And she was just yelling at me. Like all I got in was, may it please the court. And she just started yelling at me. And I came out and I looked around. I'm like, well, I didn't cry and I didn't get deported. I want to do that again. You can only go up from there. And from there, it's only been a thrill. I love being on my feet. I think there's something about the fear element of it that makes it exciting for me. And it's funny because I said I would never date or marry a litigator, because the arguments are bound to be horrific. And of course, I ended up marrying a litigator. So,
have you ever been back to China by yourself or with your parents to close that circle?
yes, so I went back right after we arrived in Canada, and it was safe to do so. And then since then, I've been back about 4 times. The last time was when my paternal grandfather passed away, and I had 24 hours notice to get back, which was just enough time to actually get back with the long flight and train and bus ride. And it's shocking to me because every time I'm back in China, I feel that a tender child part of me is locked up in that homeland. When I go back, I'm just much more emotional and much more open. I just feel things a lot more. And they say that in your second language, you're more logical. And I feel that in America. In America, I'm just a little bit more buttoned up, a little bit more in control. And in China, the first few times I went, I couldn't stop from crying whenever I saw my family. I was like, oh, you're here. You're here again. We're in the same place. Except it's so many years later and we've missed out on so many memories. And that bittersweet feeling, it can't help but bubble up and take over me whenever I'm back home. So I love going back, and I also hate going back because it reminds me of so much of my childhood that I lost and in many ways can't recover.
Thank you. We have time for anybody else? One last question? Oh, one last question. Okay, here we go.
Are you going to write another book about your experiences in Canada and sort of pick up where this leaves off?
So I had not intended to and people ask me all the time, why did you just focus on these years? And it's precisely because I didn't see this book as being about me. It was about the experience of being a child, being an early immigrant, being part of a family that comes under extreme pressure where all of the boundaries and dynamics are broken. But people have asked me this so many times, and now I have started to think about writing a follow-on, and I would be very much open and excited to do that. I just need to make sure that I've had enough time to process everything, because it took me decades to process just this sliver of time. And I want to make sure that what I share is authentic and intimate and is important. And right now I don't know what important thing I have to say about those years yet. I mean, there's some very interesting events that happen, but I have to make sense of them in the scheme of life and literature. So I'm working on percolating that. But in the meantime, I'm working on a novel about Asian American women working in big law firms. And I think my parents are very, very relieved that I'm working on fiction and would prefer that I stay in that realm.
Very interesting. I was at Mount Sinai, and I had 6 months a nurse from Shanghai. And it was very interesting because, again, she had one child. And then when I went to visit her in Shanghai, then now it's the two children per family. But it was very interesting because we were doing research in her hospital, but she could not tell us because it not the best results. So they really did stymie about the nurses really felt. So how do you feel about this, the changing from the, and when she came to me in Indianapolis, I actually had her come back. She bought two dolls, and they were from China. I'm like, what do you mean? You brought them here in America? And she said, back there, I cannot buy these dolls for my daughter. I can only buy them here and then take them back to my daughter.
Yeah. I have a lot of opinions about the Chinese government and what it does to its people. I will not voice them all because it will take years and you have to go home eventually. But that one-child policy is inhumane. One of my father's sisters got pregnant with a second child. This was many years back. And she really wanted to keep this baby. She could not see herself killing this baby. and she really wanted, she had a son, she wanted a daughter. So she hid, she stayed indoors, and she tried, because once you deliver, they sometimes do, but they can't really force you to get rid of that child. And she hid for 8 months. She was very pregnant, and a neighbor saw through the window that she was pregnant, and they all knew she already had a child. And China very much rewards people for telling on their neighbors and friends and family. So the neighbor told the family planning agency, and they showed up in the middle of the night, and they forced an abortion on my aunt at 8 months. She still has not recovered from that. To say that the government has any say over a family, what a woman chooses to do with a pregnancy, but what a family chooses to do in terms of bringing people in the world is just, I mean, dystopian novels have been written about it. It should be unfathomable, and yet it has been happening for so long, and it has caused a lot of problems that were not even anticipated. The number of single men now who are in China who can't find a spouse, the number of elderly people who are now reliant for parents, each for 2 young people to take care of in their aging years. Just there are ramifications that the government did not even try to consider. And that is what happens when the government just goes too far into the lives and the rights of people and of women. And I just want to say, I know we got to wrap up, but it has been very special for me to be here with you on International Women's Day. Growing up in China, there were 2 major holidays in my household because my mother is a special woman. One was Lunar New Year, and the second was International Women's Day. So short of Lunar New Year, this is the biggest holiday in my book, and to be able to spend it all with you all here and have such an enlightening conversation, thank you, and the warm welcome that I've received, and to just engage in community has meant the absolute world to me, and I will treasure this memory forever. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We hope to see you back again, maybe next winter.
Would love that.
You come with your dogs. And thank you, everybody. And I just want to recognize each one of the women sitting here tonight, because I am sure that you are amazing. Whatever you have done or you're doing or you will do in your lives, it's going to make this world a better place, and it will touch someone along the way. And thank you. And please stay. She's here. She will sign books. We have books for sale if you have not bought yours. And see you next event at the JCC.
Thank you.